what you're seeing is socialism in action. Socialism and communism, the experiment has failed every single time that it's been tried. Every time that it's tried, it fails for one reason or another, because of revolution, because of people, or because of economic collapse. And here we are seeing it again, but nobody's calling it out. Nobody's saying it.
This is the Hey Ed YouTube channel, and I am your host, moderator, and all-around nice guy, Edward Anderson. And today I've got a really exciting episode. It's probably going to be a little bit lengthy, but that's just because our guest is so fascinating. I cannot turn, whenever I get a chance to have him on, I want to milk him for all he's worth. He's such a good source of information. So please, settle in, get your cup of coffee, and enjoy the show. He's a world-renowned figure, literally, and I'm not just saying that. He's been rated the #1 podcaster in Australia multiple times, and he is recently voted by Australian Magazine as a man who would most likely be voted in as the chief of the village in a post-apocalyptic world. So, ladies and gentlemen, Rob Bruss from Australia. Hey, Rob.
Hello, Ed. How are you, mate? More like the village idiot than the chief of the village.
Good to see you, man. And I would be remiss if I didn't tell everyone you just started a brand new channel, which is fascinating, about how to survive in nuclear war. So what's the official name of the channel?
So the new channel is called Nuclear War Survival, and I created that because we're in chaotic and crazy times. Back in the day when the Cold War was about, you would remember probably better than me because you're from the US and a little bit older as well. But I remember my mum and dad telling me about all the things that used to happen and all the drills and all the stuff. None of that happens in modern society. And if a nuclear weapon actually did go off, and we are at 20 seconds to midnight. We're not at 1 minute to midnight. We're at 20 seconds to midnight. We've never been closer to a nuclear war. You need to be prepared. You need to be prepared emotionally, spiritually, intellectually, physically, financially. You need to be ready for it. And there's a lot of prepping channels that are out there, and they cover the topic of nuclear war. But what they don't cover is they don't cover the military trigger points, because they just don't have the depth of knowledge and the expertise. And I partnered up with my good buddy, Mario Bekis. He was the chief of intelligence for the Croatian government. He was in the war there in the 1990s. He was a communist, and he's no longer a communist because he's fighting on the right side of that ledger. So he's got a really interesting view about socialism and communism. We all hear about these things, but he's a guy who grew up in it, who lived it. His mum and dad lived it. His grandfather lived it. And it's worse than you could ever possibly imagine. So he's a really knowledgeable and smart guy. He runs a business called Insight Intelligence, does all sorts of things to do with whistleblowers and corporate espionage and all sorts of really cool stuff like that. So the way you describe what he would do in one word is he's a spy. Yeah, so he was a spy for the Croatian government. And then he does a whole bunch of spy stuff on the outside of that. He's been in Australia for about 22 years. So it's a fun topic to talk about. It's a little bit dark at times, but the reason I say that it's fun is because getting ready for the worst case scenario is everybody's responsibility. Your grandparents and great grandparents survived the harsh times of World War I, the Great Depression, and World War II. And it's going to be your job to survive this impending conflict and the World War III that we're already in. We are at World War III. It's here.
Yeah, I agree with that. I just did a video titled Why World War III Must Happen. There are reasons why, personally, I think World War III has to happen. It has largely to do with the Great Reset and the true evil powers in the world, which is the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab and the elites who want to do certain things. They've been eroding our freedoms now for a long time. And I think to make that last final push to get people to give up their last bits of freedom, they need a big event. They need something where they say, all right, if we want everybody to adopt this unipolar government that we want to achieve, we have to get people to give up their last bits of personal freedoms. You know what? World War III just might do the trick. If you have everyone worried about World War III, they might be willing to give up those last bits of freedom, because after all, the world is at war. So I've got to make my sacrifice. So that's my theory on it. That's why I think that World War III must happen. Now, World War III, in my opinion, doesn't have to be a shooting war. I do think that one is coming, but World War III could just be a really big, earth-shaking economic war, which we were already seeing with the announcement by the BRICS nation to form their own reserve currency to compete against the U.S. dollar. And the U.S. dollar hasn't had any real competition in 80 years. But now, so the face of the world financially, economically, I think is going to be much different in very short order than it has been. So any thoughts on that topic real quick?
Well, think of how the US dollar became the world's reserve currency. It was largely in part to the end of World War II and Europe being completely decimated and countries not being able to trade with each other. So in order to trade together, what we'll do is we'll just do it in US dollars because our country's okay, our economy's okay, we've got lots of money, we can just print more money and everyone will trade like that. The Australian dollar is not the world's reserve currency. Neither is the ruble, neither is the yen, neither is the whatever country you can think of. The Botswana pulla is not the world's reserve currency, and everything's okay here. If the US dollar was suddenly not the world's reserve currency, everything would be okay. Your economy would have a really hard time and business would be very different. Life will be very different. But if it's not the world's reserve currency, it's all right. Just Aussie dollars suck against US dollars. And whatever becomes the world's reserve currency, and maybe instead of trading in one reserve currency, like me, I want to buy a Boeing 787 and I need to turn my Aussie dollars into US dollars to give to Boeing in Seattle to get my plane. Instead of doing that, I'm just trading in Aussie dollars, and I'm just giving Boeing Australian dollars, the Australian equivalent of the US dollar.
You guys are used to not being the world reserve currency, so your economy is set up accordingly. Now, America, we've been spoiled. We are used to the US dollar being the world reserve currency, so we've been able to export a lot of our inflation over the years because of that. Well, as these countries stop doing, even if it's just a fraction of their business in a different currency rather than US currency, and those dollar bills start flooding back to America, that's just going to send us into hyperinflation. I mean, the definition of inflation, the printing of money is the oversupply of money, right? And so as those dollars come back, look, as you know, I know you know because you mentioned it in your last video with Mario, that 80% of all US dollars were created in the past 2 years alone.
Mad.
They have no compunction against printing dollars. I'm talking about the Federal Reserve. And well, if you add to that the big flood of US dollars that are going to come back to us from overseas because they don't need it anymore, because now they're starting to use this new world reserve currency, well, that's going to send us into hyperinflation. But that's because we are used to being the world reserve currency. So it's a big game changer for us, not so much for you guys.
I think so. And, what you're highlighting there is a glimpse of a dystopian future. And it's not the utopia that these globalists would have you think that it actually is in some strange socialist society where we're tracked, traced, and databased in every single thing that we do. It's not. It's a chaotic, messy, ugly future that's actually happening. And unfortunately, whether we like it or not, unfortunately, whether you believe me or not, the world is never going back to anything that was pre-2020. The turning point that we've had was what happened in 2020. It went for a couple of years, it all settled down. And on February 24, when the Russians invaded the Ukraine, that is when the decoupling of the globalized system began. And I've been trying to put myself 20 or 30 years into the future, more towards the end of my life when I'm 70 or 80 years old. And I'm looking back at this time just thinking, man, remember when that happened? That was the start of something really big. And what does the world look like when you fast forward 20 or 30 years into the future? I think we're a massively divided East and West type scenario. I think, as you pointed out already, it's the BRICS nations, but it's not just the BRICS nations. It's a bunch of African countries. It's a bunch of there's all sorts of countries that are on the side of the Russians. And that it's because they don't believe in this capitalist view. They don't believe in this democracy. We don't live in a democracy. We don't. We live in totalitarian controlled societies. And you may get to go to a poll and vote for somebody, but that somebody that you vote for is not necessarily the man or woman that's actually driving the whole thing. And unfortunately, not to pick on the US, but your president is an example of that. The guy is completely lost. He's from one day to the next, he doesn't seem to know he's asked from his elbow, and he makes all of these gaffes and all of these mistakes, and it's just not him that's actually driving it.
No.
And it reminds me of an interview I saw. I think it was with Megyn Kelly and Vladimir Putin, and she asked him about Trump. It was before Trump was in there, and Putin just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, who cares who's in charge of America? It makes no difference to me, because the person that's in charge is just representing the collective that's actually there. And they're not, in most cases, the ones making the decisions. It's the collective behind them that making the decisions. Look, democracy is the least worst system that is out there. We've all heard that statement before, and I think that rings loud and true more than ever before, because I don't want to be in a Chinese type society where you walk into a shop and you just look at a screen and they say, yeah, you've got this many credits, or I go and get the things off the shelf that I need, look at the screen, they go, no, you can't have that, or that because of this. I don't want to live in that society. I don't want to live in a society either like Russia, where the government is controlling everything that you hear, see, and you're exposed to. And the government is trying to control your mind, your feelings, your thoughts, and your tongue. That's the antithesis of what I don't want. And the Chinese Communist Party are the same things. But this is half the world is aligning to that. So when we fast forward to the end of this conflict, whenever it might be, it's a very, very different world. When whatever you've had before, that was utopia. Now we move forward into dystopia and chaos and destruction and just the most awful things ever.
Well, that is, in a nutshell, the focus of my YouTube channel, is to fight against this totalitarian state that is here. If people think that America is immune to everything you just said, it's not. We do have our social credit system being put in place. It's called ESG, and it is an insidious. It is at the core. Look, they're out to destroy Western civilization, and they're going to do it through this ESG and the ESG type philosophy. Look what they did in the Netherlands, where the government there, by decree, told the farmers they couldn't use more than a certain amount of fertilizer in order to grow their crops. So what happens? Their crops disappear, or they're greatly diminished, and the government says, oh, well, you're not producing enough, so we're going to take over your land. Well, yeah, we're not producing enough because you're not letting us produce enough. But they want that grab. The famous line from Klaus Schwab, by 2030, you will own nothing and you will like it.
If you extrapolate that to its nth degree, you end up in Sri Lanka, where the economy completely collapsed because of ESG. And they had the world's highest ESG scores, and one day they came out, they said, no more this, no more that, and everyone's like, what are you talking about, man? We're actually a pretty productive country. There are lots of agriculture, pretty self-sufficient. They need a bit of help, right? Because all countries need help, because they got a large population and a small landmass, and they suffer from rising seas and all sorts of problems like that. But the reality is they were okay. They're just another country until this ESG came along and completely decimated their economy. It's an absolute tragedy. I can fast forward a little bit here for you and predict the future. Good. Because this Klaus Schwab stuff and this track, trace, and database society that they want us to move to, because when they do that, you'll own nothing and be happy like they tell you, right? The way that they'll accelerate that is they'll allow this conflict to expand. And what I really think is that people like Putin and Xi Jinping look at Klaus Schwab and they're like, oh, we don't want that. We're not aligning against that. And so the deliberate destruction of the American economy that you are seeing through inflation, through higher gas prices, and through crazy political division that's in your country is something that's actually been promoted by the deep state for the division of it. And then eventually that will end up in a shooting war, either with China, Taiwan, Iran, and Israel, or we get drawn into a conflict much deeper with NATO there in Russia. And eventually that's going to come home to roost with you guys there in the States and here in Australia as well. We will be the first country here in Australia, mark my words, we'll be the first country attacked by the Chinese. And the reason for that is because of Pine Gap. Pine Gap is the eyes and ears in the middle of Australia for all of the US military, and they will take that off the table in the first hour of the war with a ballistic missile, whether that's a nuke, an EMP weapon, or just a ballistic missile. That's going to cause us all sorts of problems. We will be attacked by the Chinese, and if that happens to you guys, I think it will happen at scale. I've spent a lot of time in the last couple of months looking at their doctrine and what they're doing and how they're doing that. And when you look closely at it, the order of battle that they have is space, air, land, and air, sea, and then land. And when you look at space and you break that down, what they're going to do is there's going to be massive attacks to our space-based assets, because all of our militaries rely on the constellations that are in the sky. Even though we've got redundancy and there's ways around that, if they start taking GPS away, critical communication infrastructure away, they take Pine Gap away, it's a relay station for all of that. That's all sorts of drama. So we're going to be attacked in space physically. We're going to be cyber attacked. There's a bunch of sabotage that's already planned and actually happened in the States before, but no one ever talks about. And then there's a massive EMP strike. If there's an EMP strike that happens in the United States, it will decapitate the US military. And then Klaus and his band of merry men will say, well, look, you know, America's been decapitated militarily. We all need to come together as a one world government to fight these evil aggressors over here. There's no better enemy than Xi Jinping, no better enemy than Vladimir Putin, and no better enemy than Kim Jong-un in North Korea as well. That's not tinfoil hat wearing stuff.
No.
This is how World War III happens. And so that's what I say. Like, if you fast forward 40 years into the future and you're at the end of your life looking back at it, you'll just be going, man, I can't believe that actually happened. And it's happening now. It's unfolding in slow time. And that's the hard part about it. You don't realize, but it's unfolding in slow time. I try not to refer to Vladimir Putin anymore. Let me just close the loop there for you. I try not to refer to Vladimir Putin anymore as Vladimir Putin. I refer to him as Satan himself. And I'm not a religious person at all, but he stands for everything that Satan stands for in that ideology and in that ideal. And his press secretary, Dmitry Peskov, I refer to him as Dmitry Goebbels, because he's no different to Joseph Goebbels from the Nazis in the 1930s and 40s. He's the same sort of thing. These people are the true evil people of our time. Klaus Schwab is like a kindergarten school teacher compared to these evil people and what they've got planned for us.
Two immediate things I want to cover is, what's your opinion on, I know that you think that a nuclear event of some kind is imminent. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. Am I correct in that?
Yep, absolutely, 100%.
Okay, so my next question is, do you think it's more likely that we get like a Terminator type attack where people are vaporized, or an EMP type attack where they just take out our semiconductor chips, or both?
I think it's not what I know, it's the doctrine that's there. And remember, the doctrine, the order of battle is space, and space, air, sea, and then land. So when they attack you with the nuclear triad, right? And the nuclear triad is submarine ballistic launch missiles, land ones, land attack missile, ICBMs, and then from the air as well. So if you look at the doctrine and all of the enemy's doctrine, so Iran, Russia, North Korea, Pakistan to a certain extent as well, it's all based on Russian doctrine, and their order of battle is space. So we said that already. And the EMP strike that they'll do to us is what will turn the lights off and cause all sorts of problems. So for the people that don't know what EMP is, it's an electromagnetic pulse. So what they do is they let a nuclear weapon off high in the atmosphere, usually about 400 to 500 kilometers above planet Earth. And I can give you a link that you can put down below. And there's a North Korean satellite that orbits in a north-south trajectory, or in a south to north trajectory. Then every couple of days, it lands over the center of the continental United States at the exact apogee that it would need to do to have a footprint that covers the entire continental United States. So it flies right over the center of it, and nobody knows if that's an EMP weapon or not. We suspect that it's an observation satellite and a weather satellite. That's what the North Koreans say that it is. If you take them at face value, okay, maybe that's what it is. But if that was a super EMP weapon, and the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians are gunning for these super EMP weapons, have got them, and the Chinese have got them as well. And the reason that they've got them is because what they do is they call this non-contact warfare. It's a way to attack the Achilles heel of Western society. And when you read Iranian doctrine, the Iranians say that EMP weapons are Sharia use. They're Sharia compliant, so that you're allowed to use, according to their religion, you're allowed to use a nuclear super EMP weapon to turn the lights off. And the reason that they say that you're allowed to do that is because here in the West, we rely on technology so much. We rely on all of these things so much, and we've elevated technology to the status of a false god. And an EMP weapon doesn't kill anybody. All it does is it fries the transformers at the substation and destroys all your computer equipment. It's a giant electromagnetic pulse that goes out there and fries everything that cannot be fixed. And the Iranians are gunning for these weapons because they believe that's the ultimate in divine justice. And the thing is, I'll just close the loop there for you as well. So the thing with Satan himself and his minions that are around him, the demonic people that are around him, they're training to win a nuclear war. Here in the West, we've been brainwashed to believe, and in the West, I mean Australia as well, right? Because we're under the nuclear umbrella of the United States, and we are a target. The Chinese have said to us, we are now a target because of AUKUS. Here in the West, we're brainwashed to believe since the early 1960s that a nuclear war will never, ever happen because of the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, which means we're never going to start a nuclear war, because if we fire missiles at you, you're going to fire missiles at us, and we're going to destroy each other, and no one wins. And the doctrine of mutually assured destruction is what dictates and determines whether or not the Americans use nuclear weapons. And you think that the Chinese, the Russians, the North Koreans, and the Iranians have the same philosophy? You're wrong. They don't. They don't have a doctrine of mutually assured destruction. They're actually training to win a nuclear war. And it's because of this one very, very clear reason. Once upon a time, all countries that had nuclear weapons had a doctrine called launch on warning. And we've got various different space-based systems that can detect the launch of a ballistic missile coming out of the atmosphere. But because of a couple of false positives that happened, we all decided that we wouldn't have launch on warning anymore. And the Americans were the most prominent, saying we're not going to do that. So if the Russians fire missiles at you guys there in the States, what happens is the doctrine is we want to check first to make sure that it actually was a nuclear weapon. Because I can fire a ballistic missile at you and not have a nuke in the end of it. It could just be a conventional weapon or a gravity missile to create massive destruction, right? That can be done. But if we fire because we think you've done that, then we're going to wipe each other out. Then there's all sorts of problems. So if they fire a ballistic missile or put a super EMP nuke into orbit, like they've already done, and that thing goes off, the people in the US are going to be going, was that a nuke? It was. I think it was. And then by the time you react and do that, that's when the ground strike Terminator scenario actually happens. That is the decapitation of the military when that ground strike actually happens. But I don't think, according to the doctrine, when you read it and you look at it and you see the reactions and the training that they do that goes with it, is that you're going to see something like that. You're going to see EMPs attack the Achilles heel of Western society, which is the electrical grid. And the reason that they'll do that is because it's non-contact warfare, and we'll just bleed you out. 9 out of 10 people will, if the lights go off, 9 out of 10 people will die in the first 12 months from disease, from starvation, and from the collapse of society. And that's why you have to prepare. That's why I created the channel, right? Because no one talks about this stuff. It's the worst case doomsday scenario.
Okay, so in Russia, in Ukraine, they've been getting a lot of U.S. support, mostly intelligence, but they're also beginning some very sophisticated military hardware. And one of the systems, it's a sophisticated missile system that basically requires a lot of intellectual support, a lot of what you call intelligence support.
HIMARS, right? The HIMARS system.
Thank you very much. And so the speculation is there are definitely U.S. advisors on the ground because those systems would not operate otherwise. And apparently this system has been used to fire rockets at the largest nuclear installation in Europe, which is around the Zaporizhzhia region in Ukraine. So I'm thinking, I want to get your take on this. So if you're the president of Ukraine, what do you think the value is in shooting missiles at a nuclear plant inside of your own country?
So
I mean, is this insanity? What would be the benefit for him to do that?
Don't buy into the mainstream media narrative, Ed, is what I would say. First of all, you're not talking about firing a Grad or an MLRS rocket system at this facility. You're talking about firing a weapon system that has a plus or minus 3 or 4 foot accuracy range. So the footprint that my shadow makes on the ground is how accurate this thing is. And if I've got sophisticated intelligence from drones, and that's correlated with J-stars, it's correlated with the JTACs on the ground, it's correlated with the eyes on the actual targeting system, we're not going to miss. We don't miss. These precision-guided munitions do not miss. The only way they miss is if the operators make mistakes. So to your point, are there people on the ground actually driving them, telling them what to do? Yeah, absolutely. Not necessarily on the ground. They might be on the radio. They might be on an email on the internet saying, hey, you know, we can see all of these things with our eyes and ears in the sky. These are the targets that you need to go after. But the reality is you don't actually see, again, buying into the mainstream narrative, you don't really need all of this speculation because the Russians are using exactly the same strategies and tactics that they used in World War II. And the way that they rolled up Europe and got rid of the Germans in World War II was by doing exactly what they're trying to do now. They have massive artillery barrages. They move their armor up and then move their infantry up, and then they park up for the evening. Then the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning, the artillery starts for a couple of hours. The armor moves up, the infantry move up, and they take the ground. They did that, and it cost them 20 million people in World War II. So what we're looking at is the same thing, but the difference this time is we know exactly where your artillery is. We know exactly what you're shooting at. And the minute you try and put some armor at us, we will just destroy it and blink it off the battlefield like it's actually a joke. And the reason that the Russians are unable to actually get there and do anything about it is because they have no combined arms capability. They have a Soviet-style army and a Soviet-style military still using doctrine from World War II. And the Ukrainians, outmanned, undergunned, are still cleaning up and kicking their butts because they have a decentralized command structure, which enables the troops on the ground with the weapons in their hand to make the actual decisions. I don't have to wait for the boss to tell me what to do or what to shoot. When the tank's coming over the hill at me, I'm just going to shoot the bloody thing. And that's what they're doing, and that's why they're winning. So to answer your question, you know, is that complete madness that they're firing at that power plant? Maybe, but I don't know. What are they firing at? Is it within 5 kilometers? Well, no, I wouldn't say it's like, no, that's not mad. If they're firing within 300 meters of it, yeah, I'd say it's bad. Remember that a JTAC on the ground embedded into an infantry platoon or section or squad could call in danger close missions within 300 to 400 meters of you. They'll, you know, if they're getting overrun, they'll call prairie fire on themselves, which is calling fire on yourself. You're getting overrun. So the accuracy of fast air, of helicopter support, is less than what HIMARS is. So you've got a pilot with a targeting pod and, you know, he's typing into his computers where it's actually going and what they're firing at. For sure, you have some level of accuracy there, but you've got the human in the loop. With the HIMARS system, you've got way more sophistication and less chance of something going wrong because you're a long way to the rear and you're not under the pump as much as a fighter pilot would be or a helicopter attack pilot would be to roll in for a danger close mission. So I don't buy into the narrative that it's dangerous that they're firing at the actual power plant. What I do is I look at the other side of the ledger, and these Russians have been threatening to use nuclear weapons, at least in their propaganda. They're threatening to do that, but now they're using nuclear blackmail. And this conflict that we're seeing, Ed, this is not Iraq. This is not Afghanistan. This is not Vietnam. It's not Somalia. It's not Cambodia. It's not any conflict that we've had. It's not Grenada. It's not Nicaragua. It's not Colombia. It's none of this stuff here. Because in a couple of weeks' time, when it starts to get really cold, the Russians are going to turn that power plant off and they're going to bleed them out. Yeah. And just yesterday, I think there was something like 60 S-400s that had moved into an airbase in Belarus. So hopefully these Russian idiots have kept it out in the open for us to strike it. And I'm certain that that's just a matter of time before that actually happens. But if we don't get ahead of something like that, they can use those S-400 missiles as land attack missiles. And we might see them turn the power off and have a massive missile barrage at the capital and the centers of leadership, because the Russians said, if you attack Crimea, if you attack Russian territory, we will go after your centers of leadership, and we will do that. At the moment, they control that power plant, and that version of nuclear blackmail is the same as a nuclear EMP weapon. Because if they turn the lights off to southern Ukraine, half of Ukraine is powered by that power plant there in Zaporizhia. And if the power goes off there, 9 out of 10 people will die in the first 12 months. Imagine all the old people. Imagine when the water in your sink doesn't work because the pumps at the actual water station don't work anymore. There's no more sanitation. There's no more heating. There's no more anything. The power goes off. It's just complete and total chaos, and it will collapse that society. And this, by the way, is Russian doctrine. Yeah. The reason why NATO hasn't got involved, and the reason why there's no British and American and allied boots on the ground there flogging these little green men that have come over the hill, is because in every exercise scenario that's ever been created, when I'm red teaming this on the side of the Russian and I'm just following the Russian doctrine and just following there, we always end in a nuclear exchange and we always lose. So we know on the NATO side that if we get involved in this, it will escalate into a nuclear conflict. And people are just so like, why can't we send them like more HIMARS? Why can't we send them some fighter jets? Why can't we do this? Because whenever we do that, they escalate to try and de-escalate the scenario. That's their exact doctrine. And what we're about to see is the power going off in Zaporizhia for southern Ukraine, which is going to bleed them out. And we might see a massive missile barrage coming from the north, their air force getting involved properly once and for all, and no way to defend against it. So the problem with it is it's just massively destructive because they don't have the troops and the infantry to come in and hold the ground. So the Russians and Satan himself will just destroy thousands and thousands of people's livelihoods and kill thousands of people in the process. It's just horrendous. It's not ending anytime soon.
Well, I've got a theory that he can achieve a lot of that objective without actually using a nuke. When November rolls around and December rolls around, and he controls the tap on the natural gas going into Europe. And he can, you know what? I think I'll turn this off for a few days and let's see how you like that. You want to start paying me in rubles now? You want to start, easing the sanctions on me now? No, not yet. Okay, well, why don't we turn this off for 2 weeks? And
let's turn the power off as well in Ukraine at the same time.
Yeah, right. So he can control. So just through the manipulation of the energy that he controls, he can cut off people's powers just by turning off the spigot, And but they're going to get oil and natural gas from America. You know how much effort it takes to get oil and natural gas over to Europe from here. Okay, I mean, the European leaders are already telling their citizens ahead of time, don't be surprised if this winter we're asking you to turn off your heat for a while. And so if they're going to be reducing, if they're going to have energy blackouts and energy slowdowns, they're also going to be having a severe reduction in their economy. So by announcing that they're going to have a reduction in energy output, they're also announcing they're going to have a reduction in their GDP. So they're saying this and they're expecting this to happen. So, if you're in, Germany, if you're, you might want to buy a few extra sweaters right now, but while you can.
All jokes aside and all facetious remarks aside, I saw a report yesterday that there'd been more than 600,000 electric heaters purchased in Germany since the start of the year, and the German government said, well, if everyone plugs, because everyone's home's heated by gas, right? If everyone plugs those heaters in all at the same time on a cold day, the electricity grid should be twice the size of what it actually is to handle that capacity. And that's just people buying like a heater that plugs into a PowerPoint, for heaven's sake. But we're going to see much worse things than that, because they're going to shut down industry so people don't actually suffer. So the industry suffers and the people are okay, but indirectly the people are not okay, because the people that go to those jobs don't have those jobs. And as you say, it just completely has this negative feedback loop of crushing the economy and the people at the same time. Putin's just laughing at you. Well, Satan's just laughing.
Yeah, well, people are going to be losing their jobs because the factory just shut down. And so the government's going to have to send them checks in order for them to survive. And so they're going to be printing money. And so that's going to affect the fiat currencies. And this is the loop that's going to affect the entire world. So when people think, well, it's happening over there, well, what do I care? I mean, you better care, because it is going to affect you. The world financial system is going to change. So let me ask you. So if someone came to you and said, Rob, given what you just said, from a financial point of view, what would you be recommending I do right now?
There's really a couple of things that I would do, less from a financial perspective, but more from a prepping perspective. What you've got to do is you've got to have things that are of value that you can exchange, whatever they might be, right? And I'm not necessarily talking about gold and silver. If you look at the price of coffee over the last couple of years, it's like quadrupled. You know, it's just unbelievable how expensive coffee is, and how are you going to survive without your morning coffee? I know that I'm going to get very upset when World War III happens and there's no brews to be drank. You know, so there's little idiosyncrasies in everybody's lives that make a difference and give you that little bit of comfort there. They make a huge difference. But what I would say is you, whatever you can do. So if you can pay off a loan and be in a better financial position now, do it. If you can't do that, if you've got first aid training and you can get better at that, then do that, because that's a commodity that you can exchange in for something else. If you can afford to buy some more food and stock up a little bit more, buy some more food and stock up, because then you'll have more when harder times come around. I think it's all about your mindset about how you should prepare. From a financial perspective, if you can figure out a way to create recurring income and bring that recurring income to yourself out of big tech, out of some way, out of, you know, and by big tech, you know who I'm talking about, right? So that's Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok, whatever. If you can use big tech in some way to actually create a revenue stream for yourself, then you'll be a little bit insulated from this economics and the craziness of the outside world that's going on as well. But recurring income is the key, where you're not having to swap your time for money. Do the work one time and then get paid in perpetuity for that particular thing. I believe that's the key. You need to take some of what you've got in your wealth and diversify. You and I talk about it all the time, into gold and into silver, and park that money into that physical store of value. You know, your crypto is not a store of value. Bitcoin is not backed by anything. And if the computers go away because the power goes off, your Bitcoin is worthless to you. But those gold coins you've got in your drawer that are sitting in front of you there can be exchanged for something at some point in the future. You've got them right there. Yeah, there you go. There you go. That's the stuff right there. And that's you know, that's the same as you taking $5,000 out of the bank and just putting it right there into that one piece of metal. It's a very good idea to do something like that.
So the three pieces of advice that I give people on my channel, and anybody who watches my videos, they're probably tired of hearing this, but I've got my three-legged stool, and you know about it too. Number one is you have to reduce your exposure to the traditional financial system, namely your bank. And that includes your brokerage firms and your crypto exchanges, by the way. You got to get your fiat currency out of the bank, because in the financial crisis, the first thing that's going to happen is there are going to be bank runs. And the way I think it's going to happen is you're going to wake up one day to hear an announcement that some major bank in New York is insolvent. It's going to happen over. That's the way it's going to happen, because that's the way it has to happen. It's not going to be a gradual, oh, they're starting to show signs of illiquidity. No. You're going to wake up one day and the doors are going to be closed. And within an hour, the other four big New York banks are going to make the same announcement. So you got to get some of your money out of the bank now before it happens. But as we all know, fiat currencies are a depreciating asset. Okay, whether they're sitting in your bank or in your hand, it's because with inflation, it's a depreciating asset. You're losing money on that. And inflation is only going to get worse from here. So what's the solution for that? That's item number two. Get some of your money into gold and silver. because silver and gold have been around for 5,000 years as barter items. So that's a way of preserving your buying power. And that's a simple thing to do. And people say, oh, gold and silver, that's only for rich people. I can't afford gold and silver. All you're doing is transferring your assets from a really bad depreciating one into a solid one. It's just a simple transfer of your assets from one category to another. Even if it's just $100, just get it into the form of gold and silver. And it's not like you're spending your money on anything. You can always convert it back into fiat currencies whenever you want. So it's a no-brainer, in my opinion. And then the third item, like you say, God bless you, is develop streams of passive recurring income. You and I have programs that we share with people. We don't sell them, we just share them. And for people who want to develop streams of passive recurring income. And then as I get that income, I pour it into this guy. And actually what I've been doing lately, Rob, you'll laugh at this. Past couple of weeks, I've been kind of slowly stocking up on booze. You know, some whiskey and some vodka. I'm talking about a good barter. Talking about a good barter item. And people might laugh.
You should, man. You know, yeah. We're kind of laughing about it facetiously, but when the first settlers came here to Sydney, the currency that we had was rum. You know, and at some point there in the US, the currency that you had there was some version of alcohol as well, which I found also pretty interesting. So, you know, it's like the coffee scenario, right?
Yeah, I've got a bunch of coffee. And people laugh at me when I went from the kind of things. I've got a year and a half worth of toilet paper. I've got a year and a half worth of toothpaste. I've got a year and a half worth of razor blades and shaving cream. And right now I'm thinking about renting a storage unit and start loading it up with water, gallons of water. Now I've got a Berkey filter, which is really good. You can go to a local, lake and river and scoop it up and pour it into this Berkey filter, and it's drinkable. So I got that as a fail safe, right? But you go to the local grocery store, get a gallon jug and fill it up, costs 99 cents. It's worth having. Again, people laugh at me. You're going to get a storage unit and fill it with water? Is that it?
Yes.
Well, I'll put some spam in there too.
All jokes aside, Ed, I think people should prepare. And if you don't want to go all the way down that road like what you're doing, and you've got that extreme kind of view of it, some people would say that's extreme. I would say that's just normal, right? That's just what you need. That's what you should have anyway. Whether or not there's going to be a nuclear war, you should have that for yourself. And we're not self-sufficient when we live in a city. We don't have a farm or a piece of land where we're growing our own fruit and veggies and things like that. So the only alternative that you have to doing something like that is simply buying large amounts of those same things that you would otherwise grow for yourself.
Well, look, I'm sorry to interrupt, but look, the way I look at it is it's an investment. If inflation is running at 20%, which I think it's actually at, it's not at 9%. Yeah, I think it's closer to 20%. Okay, well, anything I'm buying today, razor blades, toilet paper, okay, I'm making 20% on it. It's stuff that I will use, right? So
yeah, definitely. That it's the rule of threes, right? So if you're hearing this prepping stuff for the first time and you're going, oh, Rob and Ed are a bit crazy. Yeah, we are a little bit crazy. That's definitely right. But if you can remember one thing from this little interview, it's the rule of threes. You can't live for any more than about 3 minutes without air. Yeah, you can't hold your breath much longer than 3 minutes. You can't really live more than 3 days without water. Yeah, and you can't really survive more than about 30 days without food. You can, but you'll be doing it pretty tough if you're at that point. So if you've got enough air, water, and food to last you those rules of threes and maybe get you to 60 days worth of water and 60 days worth of food, what you're doing is you're buying time. And in that time frame, you can figure out what it is that you're going to do to solve those problems. Because very quickly, and I would go so far to say that just about every single person in Western society that comes from a normal family, that has a normal job and has a normal family, just a normal person, and normal is subjective, of course, but most normal people in society have never really been hungry. You've definitely never been thirsty. You've never been put in a position where you haven't had a drink of water and you have got no way to get any more water. And I can tell I've been in both of those circumstances in the military, and I can tell you that it is dire when you don't have water to drink for one reason or another, and there's no access to water, and it's not raining, and you don't have a way to filter water. you find yourself in desperate circumstances really, really quickly. And that can be alleviated by doing what you said, Ed, just by having a couple of boxes of water in the garage. You can ration that stuff for yourself. You can have a Berkey filter and have a local water source to solve that problem as well. You have a couple of jerry cans there as well. Some really simple ways to avoid all of that heartache for yourself. You know, it's simple. There's another little mantra that I learned recently from a guy named Brad. His YouTube channel is called Full Spectrum Survival. He's a prepper. And so he says, what you need to do is, first of all, do your chores. So do your work, do your job, earn your money, do your chores, do your prepping, whatever that prepping is, go into the shops, buy some more food, figure out how to do something, read a book about first aid, whatever, and then have some fun. Because we're living in an economy and a time in history that is just so much doom and gloom. And wherever you look on your social media, wherever you look in mainstream media, you see this doom and gloom, and they perpetuate it because it gets clicks and it gets eyeballs, and it's hard to avoid it. And if you surround yourself by it all the time, it's hard to not let it affect you. It starts to get you down after a while. So if you come back to that mantra of do your work, do your prep. Yeah. So you're doing your work, you're doing what you have to do anyway. You're doing your prep. So you're giving yourself a little peace of mind, and your prep might only take you half an hour per day. And then go and have some fun, whatever fun is to you, hanging out with your family, your friends, playing a video game, watching a movie, whatever that might be. Make sure you have some fun every day. I think that's a critical piece that people just forget about.
Okay, so let me ask you kind of a practical question. When the time comes, what's better, bug in or bug out?
Good question. Depends how prepared you are, right? You're prepared, so you could quite easily stay there for a period of time. But what you want to do is you don't want to advertise the fact that you're prepared to stay there for, because I've got 6 months of whatever. I don't want to advertise that to anyone, because pretty quickly you're going to find people that have got no prep, and they discover that you've got that, and they're going to come and get what you want, what you've got. So I would look at it from the perspective of, it's not a question of should you bug in or should you bug out. What you should look at is the trigger points for you. That's why I created the Nuclear War Survival channel, right? It's about trigger points. So there's a couple of really serious things that might happen that might trigger a nuclear war in the next 12 to 18 months. And that's when North Korea invades South Korea, when China invade Taiwan, when Israel go after the Iranian nuclear facilities, or if the conflict widens and goes beyond the borders of the Ukraine in Europe. So if one of these things happen, or concurrently these things happen, you've got to have a trigger. So I believe that World War III begins when North Korea invades South Korea, because North Korea does nothing without the Chinese approval. And the Chinese will go, right, that's enough. Biden is about to leave office. We've only got 12, 18 months left to do this. Now it's your turn. And North Korea will go and invade South Korea, tie up the Quad, tie up everyone's resources, and then go and have a good, proper crack at Taiwan. But when the North Koreans go after the South Koreans, there's going to be 1 million North Korean troops coming over the hill, and there's only like 40 to 50,000 people there on the other side of it defending that position. It's the most militarized part of planet Earth, and there's a whole lot of things there designed to stop it. But there is some, when you start talking about quality versus quantity, quantity has a quality all of its own. And if there's 1 million troops coming over the hill at you, what are you going to do? The only thing you can do is fire a tactical nuke at them. That's what tactical nukes are designed for. They'll fire a tactical nukes, and the North Koreans will say, hey, you fired first, now eat this. And then that's when the EMP strikes happen. That's when World War III happens. That's when it goes. So if you hear rumblings in the media, mainstream media, offline media, wherever, that North Korea is about to have a crack at South Korea, that's a trigger point right there. So what are you going to do? Currently, you've bugged in, you are where you are, you're safe where you are, you've got what you need now. Do you actually need to go somewhere? And the way I think about bugging out is, what you've got to do is you've just got to get out of the way. You don't want to get your shotgun out and get your rifle out and shoot somebody because they're hungry. You don't. But equally, you can't feed 400 people coming over the hill because they've got no food and haven't had anything to eat for 2 weeks. You just don't have enough resources. And they've come together as a band of merry men and women, and it's Mad Max type scenario because the power's off and no one can get any food or anything like that. What you want to do is you just want to get out of everyone's way. You want to get out of the way, and you want to be quiet. You want to stay in cover, and you want to be concealed from the world. So I look at a bug out location as that. what can you do to get away from there? And even if you needed to leave where you are now and all of your resources are where they are now, what can you do to protect those resources and bug out, get out of the way while all the chaos is going on, and then you come back and you've got those resources as well. What you need is the trigger, first of all. Like, what are the triggers that potentially are going to cause this? And then what would I do if that trigger actually comes to pass? You need to think about these things before they happen. That's the chaos that you see. You know, I laughed pretty hard when I saw those airstrikes happen in Crimea. And there's people on the beach like filming with their phones. They're filming this, and then everyone's packing their stuff up and they're grabbing their beach umbrella and they're running for the car and they're getting the hell out of Dodge, right? It's like, no one's ready. Like, what are you doing on a holiday in Crimea? What's the matter with you? Like, what are you thinking? And you know, I think it's total BS that Satan has an 80% approval rating in Russia as well. He doesn't, because if he did, 80% of the people that were there on holidays would have stood there and went,
well, you know, well,
fighting. But they didn't. They bugged out.
Well, apparently Zelensky has been making noises about going after Crimea and getting Crimea back. And he says the first thing he's going to target is that really long bridge that connects Crimea to Ukraine. It's
the longest bridge in Europe.
It's the longest bridge in Europe. And if they take out that bridge, boy, people are cut off. And he sent out a warning to any Ukrainian living in Crimea to get out. So that'd be an interesting little wrinkle and things. You know, I mean, Russia's got their biggest naval base there in Sevastopol, there in Crimea. It's a very important, you know, naval base. So, but that's a pretty bold thing. Here you are fighting to save Kyiv, and meanwhile, you want to go after, you know, Crimea, which is a lot further away. You know,
well, if you look at Kherson in the south, that's as far as the Russians got, right? They didn't get past there on the way to Odessa. They got stopped there. So now the Russians have been encircled like they encircled the Germans in Stalingrad, right? So that and all they did was cut them off. So the shoe's on the other foot now. They've blown all the bridges. They blew the road and the railway network to the north of Kherson there around the dam. They didn't damage the dam, of course. There's only 2 ferries that go across the river there to actually resupply everyone. And there's 20 to 25,000 Russian troops there. And you know what? They're talking about this counterattack and this counteroffensive. We don't need a counterattack or a counteroffensive. I keep blowing up your ammo in the rear because you're an idiot. And you're stupid. The Russian trains come along and stop, and they just dismount all the ammunition from it. And the Americans and the Ukrainians must be like looking at this at their screens, going, should we just wait for another train? Another train, it's going to be a bigger bang, right? And they probably fly like a $300 drone over there and drop one hand grenade, and the whole thing goes up like that. You know, you don't need sophisticated GPS guided weapons to do it when the ammunition's out in the open, right? So you're just destroying all of their resupply in the rear. And when you look at their strategies and tactics, I said it before, that's what they did in World War II. They moved up their ammunition depots right behind their front line to resupply the artillery and resupply and refuel the tanks, and then give more beans and bullets to the soldiers, and then off they go. And now their resupply networks and their ammunition places are now 90 to 100 kilometers in the rear, outside of the range of the HIMARS weapon systems. So it takes them a long time to get the trucks back and forth to actually do that. That's why the war's ground to a halt and a stalemate. And then if the Ukrainians go away and blow all the bridges around Kherson, then they're attacking all the ammunition depots in Crimea itself. I'm just going to sit here and wait, man. I don't need a counterattack. I'm just going to wait. It's like the Taliban. The Taliban are just like, you can stay here as long as you want. I don't care. I'm not going anywhere, man. This is where I live.
You know, I've heard some military analysts suggest that all he really wants is everything east of the Dnieper River. You know, he wants, and then, well, listen, the Donbass area where he is right now, as far as I'm concerned, that's low-hanging fruit, because a lot of the population there were loyal to Russia anyway because of their vicinity to Russia. They're right on Russia. They have relatives who live a few miles away. But I don't think he wants to stop at Dnieper. I think that that Putin, he's an old-style KGB guy who longs for the golden days, you know, and he has visions of reuniting the USSR. I mean, I think he wants Kazakhstan back, and I think I think he wants all the stands back, and I think he wants Belarus back. But that's an easy one. Belarus is friendly to him anyway, and I think he wants Ukraine. I mean, it was the breadbasket of Russia. They really hurt when they lost Ukraine. I think he has visions of reuniting the empire.
You're quite right. There's a book on my shelf behind me here, written by a lady named Rebecca Kofler. She was a DIA agent and a Russian analyst. She's from Kazakhstan. Took her 10 years to get into the DIA, right? And I'll put some words around it for what you just said. What he wants to do is he wants to reunite Eurasia. So he doesn't see it as Europe or Russia. He sees it as Eurasia, and Russia has a right to rule Eurasia. He's the ruler of Eurasia. So Eurasia is going to be ruled by Satan himself if he actually wins. But Satan and his little minions, unfortunately, are not going to be able to do that because their World War II strategies and tactics don't work in modern warfare. They don't have sophisticated command and control. But we're going to find ourselves in deep water if the Chinese reinforce them. The North Koreans said they'll send them 100,000 troops. The Chinese might send them some troops. There's a bunch of African nations talking about it. The Serbs in Central Europe are all carrying on about it as well. And there's a bunch of people in Hungary that are pretty sympathetic to it all as well. So we've got to be careful that this doesn't spill over into something really significant. And that's why I say this is not Afghanistan or Iraq or Vietnam. This is way more complicated than that. And this is going to go on for some time. And the escalation of the power going off just as winter starts in Ukraine, and then the gas going off just as winter starts for Europe, particularly for Germany, because they're the ones that are most reliant on it, we've never seen this before. No. We've never seen anything like this before. And the escalation that will be may force people in Europe to capitulate. He might, there's one of three things happen. He wins, that we win, or we all annihilate each other. They're the three scenarios. And that's going to play out in the next 18 months to 2 years. And I think it ends in massive EMP attacks. I think it ends in massive nuclear exchange, because the NATO scenarios say that that's how it ends, and it's played out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times over the years. And you can't back the guy into a corner with his nuclear weapons. Eventually, he's going to pull them out and go, right, that's enough.
Let me ask you kind of a naive question, because as you were talking about that, a thought popped in my head, which I hadn't really thought of before. Okay, so let's say that they launch an EMP attack, on Europe. Wouldn't that same EMP that's coming from space, probably launched from space, wouldn't that also knock out their own infrastructure? Or can it be targeted? Can EMPs be targeted?
So we've got non-nuclear EMP weapons ourselves on our side. We've got a system called CHAMPS, and it's kind of based on a weapon system it's like a Tomahawk missile, right? It flies around and it has EMP capability. You want to turn the lights off in that building? Just point it at that building, lights go off. I could go and build you an EMP weapon in the next 4 hours. I could go down to JCar Electronics around the corner here, pull all the components together, get all the bits and pieces, and to do that.
So you know, Rob is not going to do that. Just so.
Well, there's EMP is not very hard to actually do. If you know how to solder some stuff together, you understand electronics, and you can program a few things, you can cobble these things together pretty easily. But doing it at scale and doing it at a level that's actually going to be disruptive enough to not just annoy somebody because you turn the computer or their phone off is very difficult to do. And the only way to really do that is with a nuclear weapon. And so to your question, can they target these things? Well, if you listen to what the Iranians have been saying for years, they've been saying that Israel is a one-bomb country. It's like, what are you talking about, man? Israel's like a big place. It's like the size of New Jersey, right? To use an American analogy, it's a big place. You can't just drop one nuke there and do that. The nuke, even if you drop a really big nuke and it hits the ground, you're probably going to destroy 5-kilometer radius permanently, and then 20 kilometers. But it's a big country, right? Even though it's a small country, it's a big, massive land. So when you listen closely to what they say, they're a one-bomb country. And you think about what they're actually doing, and then you go and read their doctrine, because they advocate for first strike use of super EMP weapons. You could turn the lights off in Israel with one nuke. So in the link below, have a look at the North Korean satellite that's orbiting, and there's a little button in the bottom left-hand corner that says footprint. So click footprint, and you'll see the footprint of something that's 400 kilometers high above planet Earth orbiting. The footprint is about 2,500 kilometers in diameter, like this, from one side to the other. It's not a circle, it's like an oval. It's what it looks like, depending on where it is on planet Earth. If it's like down near the Arctic or up near the Antarctic, it's more of an ablated kind of blob. But when it's over like the middle of America or the middle of the world, like around the equator, it's like a nice oval like that. So the answer is yes. You can set the EMP weapon to go off at a certain altitude, and that certain altitude will cause the EMP to only have a footprint of that. And they proved all this stuff. They proved all this stuff with in the 60s with nuclear weapons tests called Starfish Prime. And again, I'll give you some links and you can have a look at that stuff. If you think this is like science fiction stuff, it's not. It's actually all real. It all happened. And it's really plausible because their doctrine says we're going to escalate to de-escalate, and we're going to do it with a nuclear EMP weapon because we know you're not going to fire back because you're scared of mutually assured destruction and you don't have launch on warning.
Let me ask you a little bit about China. China right now is having some real financial challenges. Their real estate is starting to crumble. China has what they call ghost cities that were built for millions of people with big fancy new skyscrapers and everything. And all the infrastructure is built, but they're sitting empty. About the only thing they have right now is a small army of guys running around to spray the weeds. And that's it. And companies are falling to the wayside left and right over there. It's largely due to their real estate overreaching. But we've been hearing stories of Chinese citizens not being able to get their money out of the bank, bank runs, and several banks where people that have gone bankrupt. I saw a clip of a Chinese man, a grown man, who was in tears because he lost his entire life savings in the bank because the bank went under, which is kind of, curious because all these banks are run by the CCP. There are no private banks. This is CCP stuff. Listen, if people think, well, that's not going to affect me, it is going to affect you in ways that you can't imagine right now. So another reason why I think hyperinflation is coming. When that happens, you're going to see every Western country blaming China for their financial situation. Forget the fact that the Federal Reserve is incompetent and they've been printing the dollar into oblivion and making their own mistakes. As soon as that happens, everything is going to be China's fault. But that's my prediction. Any thoughts?
Yeah, man. There's a bunch of people in China that got together that just said, we're just not going to pay our mortgages. Mm-hmm. Not going to pay. Come and take it. And they just don't have the resources to come and repossess hundreds of thousands of people's homes. And what you're talking about there, Ed, and I think it's really important, man, that you raised that. And I'm so glad that you did, because all of the lefties, all the loony lefties, as we call them here in Australia, the loony lefty socialists like Justin Trudeau, like Joe Biden, and all the freaks that are running that rock show that are behind him because he's not in charge of anything. He can barely put his jacket on or his sunglasses on his face. We all saw that. What's happening there is what you're seeing is socialism in action. Socialism and communism, the experiment has failed every single time that it's been tried. Every time that it's tried, it fails for one reason or another, because of revolution, because of people, or because of economic collapse. And here we are seeing it again, but nobody's calling it out and nobody's saying it because it's just the economy. And the problem is that the government never allowed people to invest in anything else, and particularly not allowed to invest outside of the country because we don't want your dollars leaving this country. We want you to keep you here. So we build these ridiculous ghost cities with buildings that are full of nothing and nobody even lives there. And the value of the property appreciates by what we say it appreciates by. Mm-hmm. And you'll buy into it because it's so profitable. You'll buy and you'll get your returns. But when you're trying to control everything and there's no such thing as a free market, it doesn't work. And I think where that ends up is the only way to really, truly bring people together is to have something that's really you need an adversary, you need an enemy, and you need to fight and rile against something. And those damn pesky Taiwanese, man, They're so pesky, those people. They're so prosperous over there in Formosa. We need to go back there and take their semiconductors and their chips and their prosperity. And the nationalist, that's what these communists are, right? They're nationalists. They're proud. They have these parades, these Russian parades on May Day, walking around and uniforms and guns and marching. They're proud of all of this stuff. That's their national pride. It's their in socialist societies, it's the collective before the individual. And that's what we're seeing play out with the CCP. And once again, it's a complete and total failure of communism. 100 million people died in the 20th century because of communism. And the experiment is happening right before your eyes here. And there in the US, you have these politicians that are promoting socialist green policies. Sri Lanka is the example we talked about before. The Netherlands, the guys in Canada as well, the farmers in Canada, all of these socialist green ESG policies that they're trying to perpetuate don't work. The only thing that works is when you give people the ability to prosper. Because if I'm prosperous and I've got a fridge full of food, a tummy full of food, a happy family, and I've got lots of money in the bank, now I can think about how to save the world. When I don't have prosperity, when I don't have enough food or enough resources for myself and for my family, I don't care about the environment, man. I'll drive a diesel car that pollutes everything. I don't care because I've got to get to work, because I've got to swap my time for money so I can feed my family. I don't care about the environment. I don't care about these things. And the people that are perpetuating these lies to us are trying to create some sort of utopian future, but without realizing they're creating the dystopian future. And it's unfolding in front of us. Look at Sri Lanka. Look at the folks in the Netherlands, in Canada, and as you say, look at China. What would you do right now if suddenly you went to your internet banking? I did all my banking on my phone before. Did it all, bang, bang, done 5 minutes. What if you suddenly couldn't log on to that app? Oh, I don't have any cash here. Like, what? What do you mean? If there's a bail-in, the bank, the ANZ bank crashed and there's a bail-in. If you've got an account that's got more than $10,000 in it, we've seized it. Bad luck. If your account balance is below $500, we seized it. Bad luck. They seized everything, right? That's what's happening in China. That's what's happening. That's the future. All you got to do is look to China. All you got to do is look to Sri Lanka, and you can see it right there. And I believe that, again, that's a trigger point. It's a trigger point to bring everyone together. Ronald Reagan said it himself in the early part when he was first the president in the United Nations, and he said, What does it take to bring us all together? An alien invasion? Imagine if we came together then, and all the people were talking about aliens all the time. But he was right. What does it take to bring everyone together? Would it take an external threat from another world to bring us all together? So what's it going to take to bring the Chinese together? Well, an external threat. Yeah, and the West is the external threat.
There you go.
It's pesky Taiwanese.
And that's why I theorize that World War III must happen for those.
We're already in World War III.
Exactly.
Already started. When you look back at World War II, it started in 1939 when the Germans invaded Poland, right? And by the way, the Germans never invaded Poland. That's a conspiracy theory. The Germans went across the border, killed all the people on the radio tower, put their uniforms on, and fired back at the Germans, took the uniforms off, and then came over and said, oh, they were firing at us, so we killed them all. It was a false flag. World War II began on a false flag, and it's a well-documented piece of history. If you just look at it on YouTube, you'll actually see that. But people forget that 18 months before that, the Third Reich marched into Austria and took over Austria, and made them part of the Third Reich. So the Austrians got rolled up in non-contact warfare, and I think part of Czechoslovakia as well at the same time, something like that. I can't remember exactly. But I know the Austrians got rolled up 18 months before the actual shooting war started. So the shooting war started here on the 24th of February, and it's begun. We are in the Third World War.
You're going to love this, Rob, if you haven't heard. But our politicians, in their infinite stupidity, just passed a brand new law called
inflation.
There you go. Called the Inflation Reduction Act. $87 billion of that is going to be used to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. That's it. Now, when you think about it, that's more than the personnel we have inside of the Pentagon
That's
the
bigger than the
TSA,
Australian Defence Force.
Homeland Security, yeah, all together. And what's their job? Their job is for enforcement, which means they're coming after your dough. And if you buy the story that they're going after the billionaires who aren't paying their fair share, I'll tell you, we don't have that many billionaires. This army is coming after us. Anybody who owns a small business, they are going to be squeezed. Anybody who, well, any middle class person, any Joe going to work every day, they make an honest living, they're coming after anything they can get out of you. Our government, I don't care what country you're talking about, our governments are not there to do us any favors. They all have agendas. And so that's why everybody has to look out for themselves. Part of this act, by the way, and you'll really love this one, is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, now has their own bank worth $27 billion. They have no banking experience. They have no regulatory experience. They don't know the first thing about banking at all. And of course, if you want to get a loan from that bank, you have to have a certain ESG score. All right. So this is what's playing, and you never hear this mentioned in the mainstream media. This is the kind of insidious things that are going on in the world that affect us all. And everyone has to know that their governments are not going to help them. The only person who's going to help you is you. So you have to start doing things. Start getting educated. And whether you do the few simple things like that Rob and I have been discussing in this program, like in my opinion, reduce your exposure to the bank, buy some gold and silver, and establish streams of passive recurring income. And if you want ideas about that, Rob and I will have our contact information below in the description. So what I'm going to do, since I always, thing with Rob and I is we always talk for like an hour off camera before the meeting, and then an hour after. We love this stuff, but we know we're trying to be mindful of your time out there. So I guess I'll take this to a close, ask you to make any final comments, and then we'll wrap it up.
I would just remind people that the politicians that are perpetrating these crimes on us are the ones that stand to gain the most. And you, just as a normal, regular person, are the ones that stand to lose the most, and it will cost you the most. Think about the politicians that are sending billions of dollars overseas to fund a proxy war while there's all sorts of problems in your own backyard. And what I would want to remind people of is to start thinking about becoming more self-reliant. And I'm not just talking financially either, that we talk about all the time on this channel, Ed. I'm talking about you need to be more self-reliant. Turn the news off. Yeah. And get your news from different sources. If you're into that stuff, go on Telegram, for heaven's sake, and look at Telegram, because Telegram's a place that's not censored. It can't be censored. No one can control that. And you'll get the real story. You'll get the story behind the story. And then when you look at that and you juxtapose that next to mainstream media or some other media, you'll be scratching your head going, why are they telling me this? It's just a narrative. Everybody has got an agenda, and these people have got a narrative that they want you to believe. So don't buy into the narrative, and remember to question everything. Be like that annoying kid that you were when you were 8 or 9 years old, asking your mum and dad an endless stream of questions about all of that. My daughter used to do that, and I'd look at her and go, you've only got two questions left for the day. Choose carefully, because you ask 2 more questions, I'm not answering any more questions, right? But do that of yourself. Keep asking questions, ask more questions, and challenge that narrative, because without doing that, you're doomed, and you'll feel really gloomy about such an awful time in history that we're at. This will end. This will come to an end, and your job is to survive it. Your grandparents and your great-grandparents survived the hardest times in human history, and we're faced with those times again now, and it's your job to perpetuate your bloodline and to survive it. So do your work, do your prep, and have some fun.
And what's the name of your new YouTube channel, Rob?
It's called Nuclear War Survival.
And of course, my channel is the Hey Ed YouTube channel. If you haven't subscribed to our channels yet, I hope that you do for more content like this, more practical information that you can use in your everyday life. And of course, I also have a Hey Ed WhatsApp group for members of my team to help build their own streams of passive recurring income. So you're welcome to join that group if you like. So Rob, thank you so much for your time, man. This is really cool. So I'm going to say good night and thanks to Rob. And then he and I are going to talk for probably another 2 hours off camera. Thanks for being here, Rob.
Bye, everyone.
Copy that.